First of Advent. Advent. I think I've told you in the past I wasn't a very good scholar in high school. Latin I took twice and never got it in grade 13. Got a 47 or 46 the first time and a 48 the second time. I always thought I should have got those 2 extra points, but peeled them and got, I think, a 49 or something like that. But anyways, a couple of words I do remember, and that is ad, A-D, stands for to. And vent is a verb. It means to come or to expect. So Advent is to come or expect something. Well, a little bit about expecting something. I should have asked Fran this ahead of time. About 8 years ago, Fran and I were invited to a cottage, well, actually it's a house that sits on the hill of Cagawan in Manitoulin Island and looks out over the bay. It's a beautiful spot. And we were invited by our neighbors that lived directly beside us. And they had bought this house a number of years ago and thought they might retire there. They also had a cottage that was about a quarter of a mile away, actually on the lake. So it was quite a nice spot to be. And our neighbors, Mary Ellen and Ed and Paul, went up every year. Usually went up about when the ice went out, and stayed right through until the fall. And would invite people up, and we were very fortunate to be one of the people invited up. Now, Paul was a detective with the OPP before he retired, but had always been a hunter and a fisher person and enjoyed that type of life. So when I went up, I brought my fishing rod and went up, and sure enough, the second or third day we were there, Paul said to me, "Well, what do you say we go fishing?" And I said, "Great, looking forward to this." So we hook up the aluminum motorboat that he has, and we head off. And now, if you've been to Manitoulin Island, you know there's one main road. And then after that, there's all these side roads. And so anyways, Paul says to me, "Well, let's take this side road." He says, "We're going over to Lake Cagawan." But he says, "I'd like to take you by a few fields. I want to show you something." So I said, "Fine." So we were driving by, and he was saying, "Well, over here in this wood area is where I do my bear hunting." He says, he was a certified guide for doing bear hunting. And he says, "This is a great area. And here," he says, "where you can do deer hunting." And he says, "We have a couple of blinds in there that we've established." And he says, "Later on," I'll take Fran and you over and to the other side of the island." He says, "I've got some property over there where I've got a permanent blind where I've built up into a tree, a stand for doing deer hunting." And I said, "That's great." He says, "What I want to show you is here in the field." And he stopped. And in this field, I looked over, and there was these strangest looking creatures I've ever seen in my life. How many people have seen a sandhill crane? Yep, a sandhill crane. Sandhill cranes are really something prehistoric. They have a thin body, a large neck, a head that sticks way out with a big beak, and a red tuft on the top. But the thing that's so fascinating about them are the legs. The legs are like sticks, and they kind of joined halfway. And when they walk like a robot. They kind of waddle along. And I thought, Alfred Hitchcock should have made a movie about this, because this is much better than crows, because these things are scary looking. And then I heard this screech. And I said to Paul, "What was that?" He said, "Well, that's their bird call." I said, "That wasn't a call. That was a screech for help. I mean, this thing was scary." So anyways, we had a grand time up there. And about the next year, Fran and I got an invitation. We love taking invitations, by the way. Anyone who wants to tell us. I took an invitation, and Fran's sister and brother-in-law for the last few years had been going down to Florida and had bought property in this resort area called Saddlebag, which is between Tampa and Orlando, inland. But it had its own lake, and almost all the units were either trailers or build-overs where they added, or prefabbed homes where they joined them together. So we were able to get a prefab home on the lake that faced right on the lake for the first year, and we really enjoyed it, and we had a good time. Went down for 1 week. We decided we would try it for 1 week. Never been to Florida. I wasn't sure we'd enjoy it or not, so we went down, and by golly, we had a good time. And we had sort of agreed that we would do whatever, that is, Fran and I had agreed we would do whatever Ron and Dorothy were into, and just join them as rather than trying to do our own thing. The next year we decided, and some of you will remember this because I took time off because it was January the first year, and then the next year we took 3 weeks off in February. You had to get coverage for 3 weeks. So we went down, and we had negotiated a trailer next to theirs, which was on an inlet bay. And it was really very nice, and it was great to be right beside them rather than 4 or 5 streets away. And we went to bed the first night, and about 6 o'clock in the morning, I heard this damn screech. And I jumped out of bed, and I went racing to the front of the trailer and whipped up the blinds, and they had a sunroom they had built onto it. It was quite nice, and then we looked over the water. There was no beach, but it was all weeds along the line of the lake. And there were between 10 to 14 sandhill cranes. They had migrated from Manitoulin Island to the northern area and come down and spent the winter, wise people that they are, and were walking along. And we thought, isn't this incredible? Of course, every morning at 6 o'clock, we would get this screech and wake us up. So we didn't have to worry about setting the alarm, I can assure you. One of the things that I did when I was down there with Ron was I went golfing 2 or 3 times a week, and I went fishing a couple of times, and we went exploring. And they were members of the Audubon Club down there. Never been officially bird watching. I had an aunt that liked to go bird watching, but hers was to kind of jump in the car, run down to the beach in Wellington, and watch and see what birds we could find and look them up. Well, I got to tell you, there is a real science to bird watching. Have you been out bird watching? Have you been with a group? Well, first of all, you've got to get your hat. No, this isn't the official hat. In fact, I was afraid maybe the hat would scare the birds away. You have to have your clipboard. You have to have your bird book. You have to have your binoculars. And if you're like me, you have to have your camera. Now, the group from the resort just sort of jumped into cars, and we went around to some of the local areas. And we would spend an hour or 2 hours looking for birds, and it was quite a nice time. But anyways, the group had decided to join up with a regional group that was taking a tour up the St. Johns River in Florida, which was about 45 minutes away from us. And we had to be at the dock by 8 o'clock in the morning. And it was a big pontoon boat that held, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 people. And as we arrived, I said to myself, well, look at, I might have some of the gear, but I don't have the khaki shorts, and I don't have the khaki shirt, and I don't have the pit hat that some of these people had. But anyways, we got on, and as we went along, there's always a keener, or 1 or 2 in every group. Have you ever noticed that? And out of nowhere, someone would say, a bluish heron! And we'd all grab, and they, to the right! And the pontoon boat would all kind of slide, and we'd go over and we'd look. And of course, I had to get my binoculars right, and And by the time we got it all set up, we were already past that bluish herring. And all of a sudden you'd hear this, "A great eager to the left." So we'd all run around, and I'd get my camera, and I remember to take the cap off, and I'd sit there and I'd take a picture, and sure enough, yeah. And we would do this. We would do this for about, well, we left at about just a few minutes after 8, and we didn't get back till about 12. Now, in Florida at that time of year, in February, it's hot. Now, this particular boat that we were on did have a canopy. But even so, by about an hour in, I was getting pretty hot. And I find my eyes kind of closing, and all of a sudden this dear old lady at the back would yell, "Oh, there is a Virginia rail!" And I'd wake up and I'd grab my camera, and you had to stay awake. You had to be ready. You never knew when someone was going to yell something. And Captain Peter, that was our captain, he had done this for numbers of years and knew the river really well. But every once in a while he'd say, "Oh, there's a new sandbar. It wasn't there yesterday." And you think, "Oh, geez, we're going to end up on a sandbar sort of thing and be here for the rest of my life sort of thing." And then someone would say, "Oh, look at that gator over there." And it must have been 15, 20 feet long, just sunning there. And they would look at us and open up its mouth and see whether the boat would fit in, decided it wouldn't, so it closed its mouth. And it was a fascinating trip. But you had to stay awake. You had to be ready. You couldn't not be there. And of course, you got points for every one that you jotted down and were the first to, And some people were really pretty excited because they had seen a common moorhen, which isn't common, it seems. I didn't realize that. I mean, why would you name it a common moorhen if it's not that common? But they had seen this particular type of breed of common moorhen. And they were all excited because they had jotted that down on their list. Now, by the time we got finished, we must have had 15 different species that we had seen. Plus the other things that we saw, such as the limb with the mother turtle and about 6 or 7 baby turtles all sitting in the sun having a fine time. Or the gator that we saw, or the snake that we saw going through the water. And you think to yourself, "Oh, I'm glad I'm in the boat, and I hope we don't hit that sandbar." You never know. You never know. You've got to be awake. You've got to watch. Now, Jesus was telling this story in Mark, which almost sounds like it should have come out of Revelations, about having to stay awake, to be ready. For the second coming is not something that we know anything about. We celebrate Advent every year. We're excited about it. We know how long it's going to be. We know that on December the 25th, it comes to an end and we celebrate the birth of Jesus. But the second coming, we don't know. We have no idea. And Jesus tells us that you've got to always be ready. And how do we do that? Well, Jesus tells us that everything is going to change, and the only thing that won't change is the word that he has taught them. The word will always be eternal. And if we could spend our time trying to understand what Jesus was telling us in all the parables and all the stories, his preaching, his healing, and the fact that he gave us some direction. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is only one God. Worship that God. If we do that and build that into our lives as much as we possibly can, then we have not fallen asleep. We are awake. If we try to study the word that Jesus gave us, it's a way for us to be continuing renewing ourselves, fulfilling the promises that Jesus gave. Sounds easy. It's hard to do in our lifestyle. Our lifestyle isn't as pastoral as what Jesus was when he lived, where people tended to, I guess market day was hustle bustle, but otherwise people had time on their hands. What do you do when you're a shepherd, sitting on a hill all day watching your sheep? Got a lot of time to think. Just ask David, King David. You have a lot of time to think. We don't seem to have very much time in our lives. If it's not filled by, and I'm one of the worst, if it's not filled by books or television, I just don't find the time to sit. That's why I love to go to Wellington, because that's a time when I can sit out on the water edge, just think, listen to the waves coming in, feel the wind through my hair, and appreciate all God has given us. We've got to find time. I don't have an answer for you. That's something that you're going to have to try to find out. Maybe it's getting up a half hour earlier in the morning, which I just really can't think about doing. Or maybe it's spending a half hour before you go to bed and just spending some time thinking about all that God has given us and the message that Jesus has left us. We have to be ready. We don't know when the second coming is coming, but we know it is. And it's like Advent. It's the time to celebrate. And we must celebrate it every day, every minute, and be ready. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.